And over to you.
Thank you everyone for joining. My name is Jason Norat. I'm joined by Buyan and Kevin from our team. We are dedicated to serving Salesforce customers, especially in Education Cloud. And we hope everyone from administrators to individuals new to the Salesforce platform will be able to benefit from our presentation today, where we'll go through a variety of things, including a demo, best practices, and a few other helpful hints and tools that we've picked up throughout the years of our implementation. And we want to thank Amit from Apex Hours for having us today. So a little bit about myself. My name is Jason Norat, as I already mentioned. I'm a consultant at IGNX. I'm a Salesforce certified administrator. And if anyone has any questions or wants to get in contact with me, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, but the majority of my experience comes in higher education for Salesforce, with implementations spanning from the West Coast all the way to the East Coast, with community colleges all the way through to universities and Ivy League, so forth. So kind of all over the place for higher education. I'm going to pass this along to my colleague Buyan.
Good evening, I guess good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be with you all. So my name is Buyan Tyagarajan. I'm a Salesforce MVP. I specialize in higher education. Again, I run the Salesforce practice for IGNX. We are an impact partner, do a lot of work on higher ed from public, private, and community colleges across the gamut. I'm here to talk about best practices on what you need to consider when you go to HEDA. I'm going to have Kevin introduce himself. Kevin, over to you.
Well, hello, my name is Kevin Durstein. I'm senior consultant at IGNX. Recently started at IGNX about 2 months ago. I'm a Salesforce certified professional and have over 6 years of experience working with higher ed institutions across the country, implementing EDA and also other managed packages and solutions such as TargetX and many others. Feel free to connect with me as well on LinkedIn.
Fantastic. Thank you both for kind of giving a little bit of insight into some of the work that you've done. And without further ado, we're going to get into the agenda and get right into things. So you'll notice myself, Kevin, and Buyan's images are going to drop off the screen so everyone can focus a bit more on the content for now. All right, so if everyone can see that we are going through what is Education Cloud and why use it. We'll start broad and then we'll work our way down into more of the nitty-gritty details. So hopefully it caters to everyone. We'll chat through some of the terminology, some of the things that you may hear or see if you're using an EDA org, or if you've just, in a community or something along those lines, if you're using SAL. We'll touch on some of those key vocabulary and terminology. Demonstrations. I will be going through an EDA specific demonstration, which focuses on an applicant then becoming a student after their application process, some of the things that they may see and interact with some of the members of the university or the college that they're attending. And then Kevin will go through and focus on SAL, so that's the student advisor link. And that whole 360-degree view of a student interacting with their advisors is part of that 360 degrees. And then we'll chat through some of the administrative tips and hints. That's something that we've seen has been very beneficial when chatting with folks in the higher ed industry, and hoping we can pass those along to everyone who's viewing this video. And then lastly, we'll get through some of the best practices when implementing, some things that Kevin has seen in his time with SAL, some things that Buyan has seen in his times with HEDA, and which is now called EDA, in case you were wondering what the difference is between the two. They're the same, there was just a rebranding from Salesforce. And then we'll go through some questions at the end from Amit, and yes, so without further ado, we will get right into it. So what is Education Cloud and why use it? Education Cloud is a solution for an institution to better manage student experience. without reading too much into the bullet points, since everyone is able to kind of see these for the most part, it is ultimately allowing us to get a 360-degree view of a student, better tracking them, their journey, all the way from, as I mentioned before, the applicant status, all the way through to a student, to an alumni, and everything in between that I may have missed. So as you can see in the image on the bottom right, it's kind of the wave of change in higher ed today. Is you've got workforce, education, and technology, and we're really just honing in on the education facet of it, right now. But some of the things that you may see as you're going through an EDA org or a SAL org is affiliation. So affiliation is pretty fundamental in the EDA world. And what that means is that there's an object inside of Salesforce that comes with the EDA package, and it connects a contact and an account. So an account gets created when a contact gets created, and there's an administrative and a household. 90% of the accounts that we deal with in an EDA org get created as administrative accounts. So for example, Sophia student is an example student that we have. They'll get created as a contact, and then they'll also be created as an account. Just helps with managing, and from the backend standpoint, an easier way to kind of track everything. And affiliations is that unique link between a contact and an account. And that account meaning maybe it's the university, maybe it's the program that they're enrolled in, maybe it's the sport that they're playing. So that's the unique relationship. Within that, you kind of get into account record types. That's exactly what I was just mentioning. So the object account in Salesforce can be repurposed, so that way you're looking at, oh, this particular university is its own account, but underneath of that, so parent-child relationship, is your programs, your courses, whatever it may be that you've put into that account, or if they play soccer versus football, things like that. And affiliations helps connect those two. Then we've got the student advisor link. This gives us, the advisors, the tool to support and lead students on the path of successful education. Kevin will talk through that more. Advisee record. This is the case object record, which acts as a hub for students advising related data. A case object is a native Salesforce object, but it's, once SAL is installed, it repurposes that object and adds in these type of records, advisee records. Appointment, and appointment is exactly what it sounds like. It is the meeting between an advisor and a student, and having the ability to track that is key in any successful relationship between an advisor and their student. Success plan is a set of tasks for a specific advisee to complete, and it's assigned by that student's advisor. The success plan template can be repurposed in the reusable series of tasks to assign to these advisees. And the advisee portal, which is where a student can actually log in and set up their appointments, and the demo is going to really focus on this from the SAL side of things. And then alerts. So any good portal and interaction needs communication, and that's done through alerts and tracking concerns and kind of making sure that everyone's on the same page. And Kevin, feel free to chime in on the SAL architecture.
Thanks, Jason. So the relationship diagram that we're looking at right now shows all of the standard Salesforce objects that interact with EDA and SAL, really. So objects such as case, contact, user, task, etc. We see those pictured in blue. And the EDA objects we see in green. So this relationship diagram, though a little bit overwhelming at first take, really shows how these different packages work together in unison to create that 360-degree view that Jason was talking about. And so we'll break down smaller snippets of this relationship diagram a little bit later in the webinar. But the idea here is to see that the EDA objects extend the standard Salesforce data model specifically for education, of course. And then SAL further extends the data model more so in the service-related activities with regards to student success. The Pathways package, Pathways package, which is over on the left-hand side, is actually an even more recent addition, which allows advisors and students to collaborate on courses. So it's almost a bridge between SAL and EDA. I'm going to turn it over to Buyan for the next slide.
Thanks, Kevin. So if you guys are wondering, right, as you guys have seen in the Salesforce world, Salesforce is strategically focused on industries now. Now, if you're an admin or you're a developer, and you at some point would be working with an university. So it is important when you get there to understand what this HIDA architecture is, and the slides which Kevin and Jason kind of addressed talks to that. Now, in the world of higher education, it's important to understand what a student life cycle is. So any student who goes to an undergrad or a grad here starts with an application, right? So if you want to do an undergrad in, let's say, computer science, so you start there as an undergrad, and for an university, you are in prospect. So when you get to the prospect, and from the prospect, at some point, you will say, maybe I want to join an XYZ college or an university. You do an application. So there you go into the application management part of it. For folks who have joined or who went through your schooling in US, it's a very tedious process where, as part of the application, you're supposed to answer questions, you're supposed to give your grades, your transcripts. There's a whole life cycle to it. And that's why the application life cycle management is an important piece. Now, if you tie it back into the Salesforce world, that's the application object, which is the core. And there's a whole status tracking throughout that process. At some point, the student says, yes, I would like to join this college, or you do not want to join the college. If you join, you become an enrolled student. And so now your life cycle takes a different path, because now you're into that institution. Undergrad, you spend 3 to 4 years. From an university standpoint, they want to track, what programs. You start with a program, like it's your undergrad, major, right? It could be, computer science or anything. And then you go and take over the courses. And at some point, the student advisor comes in. That's what Kevin was talking about, the student advisor point, to maintain retention. And the whole engagement of the student is happening through the portal. So that's just from a typical high-level process flow on what a student life cycle is. If we can go to the next slide. As you can see, from a Salesforce standpoint, what Salesforce offers is different departments in an university. So you got the admission and the marketing department. Their job is obviously, to sell. And so as part of it, so you start as a prospective student. So that's where the recruitment and admissions component comes in. Any university will start with HIDA. So HIDA is the underlying architecture. And from the architecture, you go as a student. Some universities, when you're a prospective student, let's say you're targeting high school students, you become a prospect. So that will be considered as a lead. At some point, you get converted to a contact. And for those who live in the B2C world, in person accounts, if you're familiar with it, that's what you would use. But in the HIDA model, it is an account and a contact. So that's what it starts. And from there, you go to admissions, and then you become enrolled. And that's where the student advisor link comes in. That's a student experience. And at some point, you get out of the institution, you graduate, and then you become an alumni. And so that's the alumni engagement part of it. So those are different, that's a life cycle of a student. If you look at it from what Salesforce offers, so there's HIDA, and then from an admission marketing standpoint, you got Pardot, Marketing Cloud, and when you get to the retention part, you got the student advisor link. Let's go to the next slide. As Kevin touched upon this, the same, it's an ER diagram, right? As you can see, the different objects. The core objects, which I just want to kind of talk to you on very high level. Every student record is stored as a contact, and then you get an account, obviously. The institution, like universities have different schools, right? There might be a college of business, college engineering school. Each of that will be an account on the overall architecture. The programs which are offered becomes accounts in this case. And the reason is, every school will offer different types of programs. So then if a student fills up an application and creates a record, that's an affiliation because that's your program of interest. You apply, you go to the application object. At some point, the application, you make a deposit, you get enrolled. There is a program enrollment object where there is tracking. So in the world of higher education, student information systems. So once the student enrolls, your financial aid, everything is tracked in as an SIS system. And usually that's an integration which comes into Salesforce. All those fields are tracked at the program enrollment level. And then sometimes students will take one-off course. So that is a course object and a course offering and a course connection. So those objects tie in if you are an individual student who are interested in a course. And then on a very other level, because students apply for terms, it could be a spring semester, fall semester, those are terms. So those are just very high level objects you need to understand from a HEDA architecture standpoint. If you can go to the next slide, and then I will have Jason kind of talk about from a demo standpoint. Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, fantastic. So thank you, Kevin and Buyan, for kind of lending your insight for the ER diagram, as well as some of the functionality of SAL as well. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go through a scenario, myself as an applicant, and I'll be Sophia's student. So I will try to put on the hat of Sophia as the applicant and the student, as well as kind of chat through what is actually going on. So hopefully that is clear for everyone. And then Kevin will be doing the same, but we will do a brief switch over to his view for Sal. So with that said, what I'm going to do now is kind of take a look as this is an RFI form that we would have for an individual who's looking to get a bit of interest about a university. So we've got some fictitious information in here right now, but ultimately we've got the Apex Hours University, and inside of Salesforce, I believe that goes to Arizona is the school of choice. And we've got Sophia's student. So she's, entered that basic information, and then I'm able to kind of switch into the view of what's actually going on inside of Salesforce right now. So on my screen, we're seeing that Sophia's student has given some interest, and some of that information is being tracked. She was able to provide her birth date, and she was also able to give us just a little bit more insight into what's actually happening. What ended up happening a few months later was that she decided that she wanted to apply to Arizona, and you can see that right here. So what ended up happening is that she applied through their portal. They may be using a form tool, or they may be using a different tool, and she was able to successfully submit for the term 2020. Now, Buyan was able to allude to what term is. Term is what it sounds like with a lot of these things. This could be spring 2020. This could be fall 2020. It's really up to the administrators in the business of what they decide for that. You can see that we're in the application status of submitted. And you'll also notice that there's a few other fields that have been filled out to show that she was applying for an undergraduate. Now, this is quite important, and you'll see why in just a moment or two. But before we get there, I do want to take a quick look at the actual individual, Sophia student, yet again. And now that she has applied, what other information are we capturing? So we're capturing race, and a few different other fields, and we're starting to leverage the affiliations. So we were actually able to pre-populate this primary academic program with one of from her RFI form. We actually said, hey, she was actually interested in economics. So we pre-populated this, and then when she submitted the application, we confirmed that via the application she was interested in economics. We actually have an account for this. So if I open this up, this is the account that was set up prior to, which connects. We're able to say, oh, we can see everyone who's in BS economics. And maybe this is the, something that she's tied to, and you can see the hierarchy in here. So we're seeing everything that falls underneath connected campus university or Arizona University, and we're able to actually see that BS economics, so bachelor's in economics, and the account record type that I mentioned before is academic program. So that's, definitely insightful from a reporting standpoint, and we know what she's interested in, and we take it one step further. Once we've got this information and all her email and contact address from that student application, because after the RFI, she was able to successfully submit this. Once this is marked to an admit or enrolled status, this is kind of where we get into, now we have a little bit more to work with. So we can start leveraging the affiliation object and a few of the other objects, for example, program enrollment. So if I go back to Sophia and I look in her related tab section, we'll be able to see that she submitted that application. So that's the one I already have on my other screen. We even get to see the courses that she is now going to be enrolled in going forward. Her affiliated accounts, as we already mentioned, BS in economics, but like I said, she may be in a few different other things as well. So she's connected to the university, she's connected to the BS in economics, and we can add to that. If she joins a sports team or something else, we can do that. We've got her address, and here's that program enrollment that I was mentioning. So if I click on this BS economics, you'll see I'm brought to that same record that I was for the affiliation. So this is it's like a junction object connecting contact and account objects. And it's really gonna let us allow us to see the association between the student and more than one academic program, because naturally they may be in multiple. And as I go through and I look at the course connection as well, we can see that she's now in an actual course that's called Chem 1020, and she's in section 9. Now, depending on the integration that is set up for this particular Salesforce organization, maybe she's connected to, this is connected to a Blackboard or a different tool out there, and we can actually pull in her grade as well. So it's a one-stop shop, and then if there's a portal for students to see, they could see all of this as well. Otherwise, this is something as an administrator, advisor, whoever from the university is using it, this is just critical information to kind of work through. And ultimately what this has left us with is a relatively clean contact record where I'm then able to take it to the next step. And that's where Kevin's going to help out with SAL. And it's going to just allow us to kind of, see what's her life like as a student, and how she's dealing with her advisor and how she's getting through her day-to-day. And you get a little glimpse of that on the right-hand side of the screen, where you can kind of see, call professor, meet with a student, abroad advisor, and so forth. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen momentarily, and we're going to let Kevin kind of give us some insight.
Thank you, Jason. So I am going to start my portion of the demo from inside the Advisee portal, or an experience that we've set up for student, Sophia's student in this case. If you're just getting familiar with SAL, I encourage you to check out the SAL documentation on the Power of Us Hub, where they have some information about the Express setup. The Express setup will give you out of the box pretty much a full setup for SAL, provided you are or at least inquiring or purchasing SAL. You'll be able to install all of the features, including a pretty solid baseline Advisee portal, which you're seeing right now. Out of the box, the Express setup gives you 5 different tabs here across the top for a logged in student. And this would be home, where you have the My Agenda component that you can put on the home page. You could, of course, put other components that are available through experience or custom components that you build. We'll see some things populating on this My Agenda in a few seconds. But the next tab would be My Team. This is where the student can see the success teams that are assigned to them. A success team in Salesforce on the back end is a case team. So you'll get to see what that looks like when we're logged in as an advisor. But suffice it to say that we have one case team assigned to the student, and that's the career services team, and Jason and I are on this. So Jason's the primary academic advisor, and I'm the primary career services coach. Those are our case team roles. You could have multiple teams assigned to a student. Perhaps you have an admissions team earlier on in the process. Perhaps you have a career services dedicated team and an academic dedicated team. It's really how your institution breaks it down and what's most helpful for them. So I can click into a staff user as a student and see whatever we're exposing to the student through the portal. So this could be appointment availability, office hours, etc. Some basic contact information, whatever it is that you need to expose, from the user profile in the CRM. The next tab that we have is called My Plans. This is where a student can see success plans that are assigned to them. And it's typically one that an academic advisor will assign to a student. Success plans are a grouping of ordered tasks to complete centered around a specific goal or milestone. So you saw a hint of this on Jason's screen when he was showing. So we have study abroad track, essentially, that's been assigned to the student, a success plan specifically for study abroad. So these are the things that the student needs to complete in order to become a study abroad student. So they'd see the due dates and what have you, and they would be able to actually complete these tasks or click in to see more details. You would just see a task detail record there. On the My Tasks tab, you would see all of the tasks that are assigned to a success plan, or that are related to a success plan, I should say. But you would also see one-off tasks that may have been assigned by an advisor or professor of the student. And so we see one that has been assigned to the student to meet with the advisor on the 12th or by the 12th. And so certainly the person who assigned this could put comments in here directing the student to why they need to meet with an advisor. And then the student would go ahead and try to complete this task. So that takes us to our next tab, which is scheduling an appointment. So this is one of the main features of SAL, and that is the ability for students to schedule one-on-one appointments with advisors. There's a great sort of appointment scheduling tool that comes packaged with SAL, so you don't have to build your own or develop your own components. You get some great functionality sort of right out of the box. So it allows you to either sort by topics or just click into one of the staff members that's on your success team. So since Jason and I are on Sophia's success team in various case team roles, she has the ability to go ahead and click in and schedule an appointment. So if she clicks in to one of the staff members, she can then pick one of the topics that that staff member allows students to request appointments for under their availability. You'll see what that looks like when we're signed in as an advisor. But right now, I'm not quite sure why I need to meet with this advisor, but I'll just set up some time here, and I need to do it by the 12th. So I'm going to do it on the 12th, and we can do this in person. And so that's actually been scheduled. Sophia can manage this appointment from here, add comments for the professor to see, or the advisor to see in this case, or reschedule, cancel. If I go back to the home page here. Oops, when did I schedule this for? On the 12th, I can see that this appointment has been scheduled. So with that, I'm going to jump over into Salesforce so that we can see what it looks like from an advisor's point of view. So I'm in the Advisor Link app, which is a console app which allows you to multitask and have multiple records open at the same time. Gives you some great views. SAL does give you some great lightning pages and components right out of the box, so not much configuration needs to be done in order to get to sort of see what you can work with. Then of course you can make customizations as necessary. In SAL, each student gets an advisee case that's assigned to their student. Everything related to that student's journey to through student success at their institution is centered around that case. So everything is really related to this advisee record case. The advisee record is a record type for cases, and you would only have one open for a student at a time, so that you can sort of relate all of these other different pieces from SAL and some from EDA and see them all from one place. It's really how you build that 360 degree view. You can see I don't really have case details exposed here, because that's not really the important part. The important thing is all of the different components of SAL and EDA that are related to this case record. So I can see from this view the success plans that are assigned to a student. So I can see that study abroad success plan. I could manage that, see how many open tasks are remaining, the status of those tasks, what have you. I could even add new tasks to that success plan. That's one of the pieces that we can see from the advisee case record. I can take notes as an advisor. One of the models that we've seen is for each staff member to sort of have a running notepad so that there aren't tons of records building up underneath each case advisee record. But you could certainly do a new note for each topic. You can create tasks. And so you can see here is the task that I assigned Sophia to meet with an advisor. And then the reason for that appointment was because of this alert. And so under alerts, this allows, from an internal perspective, staff members to indicate when there is a concern regarding a particular student. This could be automated based on the data that you integrate with your CRM. So when grades reach a certain point, if you are bringing that data in, that could raise an alert. Or if you're bringing attendance in to the CRM, which in this case we are, this particular alert is because Sophia has missed a couple classes in a row. So that would be why I might have gone ahead and assigned her a task to meet with an advisor. And then also check in with the professor, maybe have Jason do that since he's on the academic side. So we can deal with tasks, alerts. We can see the upcoming appointments and past appointments. You see the one that she just scheduled with Jason, and I can see, okay, so that's working out as far as that alert. And then maybe I would double back to that alert and go ahead and close that if it feels appropriate. Success teams, as we mentioned, this is where we can add and remove teams, success plans, notes, and then all related activities. The rest of these related lists are actually more so related to the contact, but you can do really any related list that also relates to the contact you can include on this page. Again, this page right here comes out of the box with the Express setup with SAL. And so it's a great way to sort of see what you're working with SAL. Last thing I'm going to show here from an advisor perspective is this really cool widget here on the utility bar called the Appointment Manager. Again, not something you would need to custom develop. This is packaged for you with SAL. It allows you to see your availability, manage your availability from this Edit Appointment Availability section. As an advisor, they can set their notification preferences, the topics that they're available for, some cool features like making sure there's buffer time in between appointments so that you're not rushing from one to the other, and to make sure that a student can't sign up 10 minutes before they want to meet with you if it's not a walk-up situation. So you can manage your availability there. You can also, if a student does happen to show up at your office and you have walk-in times, you could log that appointment. Or if you're scheduling an appointment for the future, you could do that as well and relate it directly to the student, and then it would show right up here on the advisee case record. So Jason, what do you think?
So from my side of things, I mean, I hope and I fully expect that everyone viewing this presentation probably has a better idea of SAL than when they started. So thanks for the insight, Kevin. And from what I'm thinking, I'm putting on my administrator cap right now is, and for anyone else out there who's on the admin side of things, is what permission sets might be like associated with SAL that we should know about?
Yeah, so it's permissions are definitely something you want to think about as you're implementing SAL. And I'll just take a peek here in the setup menu. This will excite any of the admins that are watching this video. I'm not going to go into Object Manager. Not quite sure why I did that. I'm going to go into permission sets. And you see these advisee and advisor. This is one that's actually, these are ones that actually been packaged along with SAL, and a great way to get started and become familiar with the objects that you would typically expose to the advisor from the internal logged in view, and the advisee, which would be the community or the experience logged in view. So again, permissions is definitely something you want to consider because you're dealing with external and internal users. So maybe you haven't had to think about permissions too much because in your Salesforce org, everyone sees most contacts and most data. You definitely want to look through the permissions that are packaged and determine, are there things we want to add or sort of take out from the advisee experience to make sure we're not exposing too much information. One of the things that we didn't see in the advisee portal that you can certainly do is expose course connections and pathways, and so the student can interact with the courses that they're signed up with a bit more than we saw in that previous demo.
Perfect. That answers all my questions, and especially related to the permissioning side of things. My other questions kind of start with, are there any triggers or custom settings that might be related to SAL that someone as an administrator should know about?
Yeah. So anyone familiar with EDA will not be too confused by SAL because it's pretty much set up the same way. So if I were to go into my trigger handlers area, if you're familiar with EDA, you know that most of the automation or almost all of the automation that is around EDA can be found and managed in this trigger handlers object, which allows you to simply turn it on and off and manage some ordering and filter on some of the automation that's sort of running on behind the scenes there. This is not something that staff members would see. It'd be more something that an admin would be working with. But the reason why I brought you here is you can see this Salesforce advisor link prefix on these triggers here. This would be the automation relating to SAL. So one good example that I'll give you that's a trigger handler. Remember how I said that there is one open advisee record type case per contact? There is a trigger in here that comes packaged that makes sure that there is only one. So if you were to try to open another one for a student, case validation, I believe, is this one. If you were to try to open another one, it would say that there's already one open.
Fantastic. And then on the other side of things, is there any specific licenses that are associated with SAL that maybe someone who's listening on this call who's more on the decision-making side of things would encounter?
Yeah, so there's definitely a cost as far as for the SAL package itself. But when you're thinking in terms of what's this going to cost for our institution, one of the other things that you'll need to consider is the community user or the experience user licenses. And so the model that typically is used with SAL, because you're dealing with a lot of different custom objects and the student needs to see cases and work with lots of different managed components, they actually do have the customer community plus licenses, so not the bare minimum login ones. You would actually have the plus or plus login.
Gotcha. That makes total sense. And I think the last thing, if before I take off my administrator cap, is a mobile view versus the desktop view. That comes up quite a bit, especially in the world of higher education, just because so many of the students and applicants are using their mobile phones and different size screens and so forth. I'm just curious to know is how SAL, and for that matter, EDA may hold up for both views.
Yeah, so the answer is great. So the components that we see and that are packaged for the advisee portal, as well as internally here, such as appointment manager and the different record pages that have been configured, they've all been built to include the latest and greatest sort of lightning functionality. Renders, great whether you're looking on a desktop or on mobile. So I'll give you an example. Recently, with most meetings happening virtually rather than in person, Salesforce also added the ability to pretty much, one-click join a virtual meeting from your appointment record, whether you're in the advisee portal or on this side. So as long as the advisor sets up that Zoom information correctly with the passcode and what have you, the student with one or two clicks from their cell phone can jump right into the meeting. So not only is it look great, it's also user-friendly and helpful.
Perfect. I think ultimately we could probably get right into best practices. And I know you and Booyan have some advice for everyone who's listening on this call.
Yeah. So thinking in terms of best practices and integration, I promised that we would get into some of the smaller snippets of the entity relationships when thinking in terms of EDA and SAL. And so when Jason was demoing the account, we saw the account hierarchy that he referred to. And it's really important that you not only select the correct account model when you're setting up EDA, so the administrative versus the household account. Administrative is what we're showing here, where you have a one-to-one relationship between students and accounts. It's not only important you get that established, you also want to make sure that your institutional account hierarchy is set up correctly, because this is what really allows you to get that 360-degree view, not only of your institution, but of the student and everything that they're affiliated with. So when we talk about the hierarchy, we're thinking the educational institution at the top. So Connected Campus University was the example that we saw as an educational institution record type. The terms and academic period sort of sit under that with a master detail relationship so that we can roll up any statistics from that object. Under that, we would have all of the departments of the institution, and that's where the courses live. So if you have a business department, you have all of the business courses underneath that department. And then you can roll up the information from the courses to the department because you have that master detail relationship there as well to the account. And then you would also have your programs that relate, and that's under your department. And so that's where a student can have an interest in a program, or they can actually even enroll in a program. And so the whole point of this is, the account model is really key in EDA, but not only just for that administrative versus household, but also in that hierarchy that you're setting up for your institution. Next thing I wanted to mention was success plans. When we think about success plans in SAL, success plans allow advisors to assign that ordered series of tasks to the student. Tasks are grouped, towards a specific goal. We saw the study abroad example in the demo, and so they have an ordered series of tasks they need to complete, each by a certain date. The student can complete them themselves. The advisor could complete them for the student, whichever is appropriate for your institution. But the thing here to know about success plans is that you can set up templates and tasks associated with those templates, so that when you assign a success plan to a student, and then that shows up in the portal, all of those tasks from the template essentially get cloned and added to that success plan. A success plan is what relates to the student, and the tasks that are under that success plan are what the tasks that the student actually sees, but the templates are what allow you to quickly generate those success plans. I think I actually missed one slide, which we'll go back to right now. And the last thing I want to talk about is the advisee case record. So we saw that one case for Sophia where I, as a logged in advisor, could see pretty much everything that relates to the student. You can see that the advisee case record is really the center of the universe. All of the advising related data ties back to the advisee case. And so the advisee record, again, is a record type on the case object, and you can only have one of those open per student. The only other thing I wanted to mention here is that you can have tasks assigned to a student, and when you want the student to see them, they would be assigned to the user student, right? The logged in user and the advisee portal. But maybe you have internal tasks, such as we need to talk about this one issue, grade concern for a student with a professor. Maybe we don't want the student to see that. We can assign it to an advisor or another staff internal person, and that can be done on the user record. It's really that key field is the assigned to on the task, and the student will not see that if they are not the assigned user. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bhuyan.
All right. Thank you, Kevin and Jason, for the demo. So in a nutshell, right, so we talked about how HEDA or EDA and SAL kind of fit into the world of higher ed, right? So now, let's say if you're a consultant or you're a university user who's kind of thinking about how do I go about implementing this in my org? So there are a couple of use cases to think about. So scenario one, you might be having a Salesforce org already in place. You may not have HEDA on it, and you might be using contacts, accounts, and the other standard Salesforce objects. This is very typical of most of the universities who are already in, because HEDA came 3 years ago, and a lot of universities are jumping onto the bandwagon, migrating it. The first thing to consider this is it's a data migration project to think about. And why do I say it's a data migration? Because at the end of the day, you have to retrofit your current data to fit the HEDA model. Kevin kind of talked about the accounts, contacts, the affiliations, and all that. So you'll have to kind of do this in a sandbox and make sure all your accounts are mapped to the right HEDA account types, right? Institutions, organizations, and all that. One of the things I always see with a lot of universities is that they kind of put this concept of bucket account where a lot of contacts will be jumbled together with this one account, which again is a performance nightmare because if somebody deletes the account, the contacts will go away. So in the world of HEDA, it's like the B2C model where you have one contact on one account. The other thing to consider as part of the migration, a lot of universities tend to use custom objects for programs of interest. And think about that, might somehow port it over to an affiliation object because that's where it will reside in the world of HEDA. And then the last part is that you really need to define the student lifecycle. Now, when you talk about higher ed, there are two life cycles which are important: the student lifecycle and the application lifecycle. From a student lifecycle, you start, you're interested in that university or prospect. At some point, you get enrolled, you're an enrolled student. And at some point, you might be, you finished your graduation, you become an alumni. So those are stages tracked at the contact level. And at an application standpoint, you might be initially, you might be pending status. At some point, you would be waiting for more documents, and then you might be approved. So that's another life cycle. So make sure that you define those life cycles, and based on those life cycles, you have different stages to think about. The other aspect of it, so the integration, I'll address that in a minute. We need to also address multiple emails. Students use a lot of emails. There might be Yahoo email, Gmail, and all that. HIDA has a lot of its own custom objects, related object to handle that. And then also multiple addresses. You might have to load that into the junction object, which is the address object, and then you link it to the contact. And lastly, you need to have a security plan to make sure that the right objects are exposed, because there's a student portal which Jason and Kevin talked about, and you don't want to expose all the data to the students. There's FERPA compliance involved in a higher ed standpoint. So if we go to the next slide, Kevin. So let's talk about the second use case, where if you are an existing org, so most of the universities typically have this kind of use case where they might be using for TargetX and Enrollment RX are very common packages most of the universities use. This is primarily used from an admission standpoint. And universities are thinking, what, now I got my Salesforce product involved, I need to expand campus-wide. So in that scenario, what do we do? How do I get to the HIDA world? So the first thing is to contact the vendors. Obviously, these two, TargetX and Enrollment RX, are HIDA compliant, but you need to work through their documentation, which would be involving a little bit of a configuration. And with that configuration involved, you set up in a sandbox. And once the configuration is in place, TargetX and Enrollment RX will populate the HIDA objects like affiliations and the relationships and all those objects. One of the things to consider, there could be possibilities of duplicate objects like programs of interest, an application object. I mean, the TargetX, Enrollment RX are using application objects. They won't. HIDA has its own application object. The question is, why do I care? But here is the key. At some point down the line, you want to kind of look at maybe Salesforce as your admission engine. And very recently, Salesforce has come up with an Admission Connect product, which is interesting. So if you want to kind of leverage that, what we need to do is build an automation so that whenever the TargetX or Enrollment RX application object is updated, the HIDA application is also synced up. The other last piece is the existing triggers, which are part of the managed package in this TargetX and Enrollment RX, will need to be following a TDTM, which is the architecture which HIDA follows. And so you might make sure that you are in compliant with that. So let's go to the next slide. So those are the third use case would be, what if I want to start new? So I'm an university and I want to start brand new with a HIDA implementation. How do I do that? Again, the same thought process. You might have a CRM already, or you may not have a CRM. So if you have an existing CRM, make sure you have your data out. Data quality you need to manage. But as part of the data strategy, data migration strategy, you need to have a data mapping, deduping, and synchronization strategy. So for your contacts, for your program of enrollment, for all the programs I'm interested in, when you load it in Salesforce, you're going to get the Salesforce IDs, but you make sure you use your own external IDs from your other system so that you can manage the deduping part very easily. And then you also have to follow a very linear data loading sequence. You start from the top, the accounts, which are the universities, the programs, then to the contacts, then to the affiliations, then to program enrollment, and then course and other objects. So it's important that the sequence of data loading is followed there. And the other part of it is also that you also update the right account types, and the contacts could be reloaded with the administrative account, which basically means you need to update the account and then you have to do the contact. If you have the HIDA triggers, the TDTM triggers enabled, as soon as you load the contact, it automatically creates an account. So that piece may be automated for you. And you need to have a plan to address multiple addresses, because most of the CRMs will have junction tables, which will have addresses, and junction tables, which will have multiple emails. Beware that you need to load that into the HIDA objects to keep that in sync. And lastly, the lifecycle stage is an important thing to kind of track about. Let's go to the next slide. So now you have migrated to HIDA. Now what happens is from an integration standpoint. So that is a very important thing, because most of the universities at least have more like 3 to 5 systems. SIS system, if you're in the manufacturing world, it's like an ERP system. So that's a system which needs to be integrated. And on top of it, you would also have some applicant tracking systems, your financial systems, all of that come into play. One of the key things you need to think about is a record mastering strategy. So what I mean by that, is whenever you have student data, there's prospective students and enrolled students. So you need to identify which system would be the source of truth. So most of the scenarios, your prospective students would be from Salesforce because your marketing and everything lives there. Yeah, and so that will be the source system. And once a student gets enrolled, most of the data is handled in your SAS system. So having that strategy and having a strategy to handle conflicts. So what I mean by conflicts is there are scenarios when data can be migrated from different systems. Obviously, there'll be an ETL tool as part of it. So during that part, you need to have a data mapping exercise where you would say, okay, if my source system is, let's say, if the student is prospective student, and if the data is coming from a third-party marketing tool, which fields in the contact, which should update and how should it update? So defining that upfront will save a lot of time during integration. Otherwise, it's a painful process. Data becomes a junk data at that point. The other thing to think about is having audit fields to know who updated, because when you do integrations with ETL tools, you need to have something like a record creation. So which system created the record to which system most recently updated. It could be your SAS system, it could be your marketing automation tool, it could be anything else. And also have a field for incoming source. Whenever external systems come in, they will have a field called incoming source. They identify which system it is, and then based on your record mastering strategy, you could kind of handle that. And also have a logging for exceptions. Again, this is again another integration best practice. If there is any exceptions, we need to log it and for the IT team to take control of it. And there might be scenarios where you might end up with complicated rules because there are scenarios on when a student's email or address can be updated based on a stage or based on a specific program. If you get into those kind of weeds, most of the solutions are custom code where you might have to end up writing a trigger on the contact level. And in that case, you have to follow HIDA compliant TDTM model, which is pretty cool in one way, because once you follow the model, you could control when your Apex class can run, your triggers can run. So that's the flexibility you get with that. And lastly, there would be possibilities for, when you get to, bigger universities, they also use target X and enrollment RX. So those systems, for example, a student on the applicant side can update his phone number. Well, if the student is already in your system as a contact, which one should you rely on? So that is the rule. And most of the time, if the student updates it, he might be the source system, and that might be the source of truth. But again, having audits on emails and phone numbers will be extremely helpful in terms of thinking about it. So again, it's just a quick overview from an implementation standpoint on different things to consider from an implementation as well as from an integration standpoint. You can get to the next slide. I think we are pretty much, if you can go to the next slide, Kevin, I think it's forward, yeah. So once again, I want to thank each and everybody, for your patience. And I think we give you a pretty good overview of what HIDA looks like and from an implementation standpoint. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. Any questions, Amit, that Booyan, Kevin, or myself could answer?